We continue our bulletin here. The Centre for Human Rights has expressed concerns over human rights violations in the northwest and southwest of Cameroon. It says there's evidence suggesting that crimes are being committed in the English-speaking regions of the West African nation. The Centre's director, Professor Frans Viljoen, joins us now from our Pretoria studio. Thanks for your time tonight, Professor. You're speaking about evidence that strongly points to crimes against humanity. What exactly do these crimes entail? What are we talking about here?
Well, perhaps just a brief background. It really stems from October 2016 already, that there's been a crackdown in this English-speaking communities of Cameroon. There were some protests and boycotting of schools and courts by the community to make the point that decentralization has not really functioned effectively in Cameroon. And in response, the government really embarked on a series of what now seems to be human rights violations. I mean, we know and we hear from reports on the ground that there have been extrajudicial executions, people have disappeared, there's evidence of mass killings, displacement of people, people internally displaced in the country, looting of properties, and also the burning down of entire villages, so that people are fleeing and left homeless and shelterless in the communities.
Why do you think there's been lack of alarm over this issue? Why do you think it's not an issue that is at least present on the international relations platform in terms of needing to find resolutions?
Yeah, that is exactly this silence and the lack of international concern and action that kind of spurred us on to bring this to a broader attention. And I think, it is on the one hand domestic. Within the region itself, there's such disarray and repression that the voices of people there are not given an opportunity to be heard. There's no press that functions within those affected regions. But inside the country as a whole, there is really a prevailing political culture that makes it impossible for people to really take positions that would make them unpopular in the eyes of the government. So there's been repression of journalists inside the country, and that has been exacerbated also by restrictions on foreign journalists, people not being allowed to come. So there's, in the first place, silence in terms of media exposure. But I think this kind of coincides also with geopolitics, that perhaps there isn't really an entity that has taken on the plight of those in the English-speaking regions of Cameroon. And, Cameroon itself as a state has perhaps the backing of important nations who, for example, have seats on the Security Council. And all these factors together, I think, have led to this silencing that is quite astounding.
Nigeria, for one, has had to bear the brunt of part of those displacements, because many of those who are fleeing their homes are, in fact, finding refuge in Nigeria. Do you think that that is an opportunity for the country, perhaps, to be one of the mouthpieces of what is truly happening in Cameroon?
Yes, I think, and I mean, there's also the link in terms of the language, but unfortunately, the evidence available shows that there's been a meeting of both people from Cameroonian descent in Nigeria and people fleeing to Nigeria. They engaged in political discourse and tried to bring together groups of people to discuss this. But at one such event, a number of people have actually been arrested and essentially disappeared. A number of the leaders that have been together have, after that event, not surfaced. The understanding is that most of them have been taken back. So they've essentially been abducted from Nigeria, the allegation is, and brought back to Cameroon, where they are held incommunicado. That is, without access to lawyers or to the outside world at all.
One of the things you've done as a response is that you've submitted a complaint under the the UN Human Rights Council on this particular matter. Have you at all lobbied some of the continental organizations? I'll talk about the AU, even though their track record is not necessarily one that's glowing, but certainly from a continental perspective, what are the mechanisms that you've tried to explore in finding resolution?
Yes, I think the bottom line for us is we cannot really say exactly what is happening. We have reports from people who are Cameroonians in South Africa, social media, some UN reports and NGO reports. But what we are really asking for is for an impartial international investigation to be allowed to go into the country, to explore, to verify the situation, and really to work towards bringing the parties together, to engage in constructive discussions and dialogue. And that has not been allowed for by the government of Cameroon so far. And that is really what we've tried to engage the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on, the African Union's human rights body. And that commission in March, when it met, it resolved to undertake such a mission to Cameroon, but unfortunately, to actually undertake the mission, you need the consent of the state. Now, the issue here is that the United Nations special mechanisms, like the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings or on torture, there is a standing invitation by Cameroon, at least on paper, that these special rapporteurs are, in principle, to be allowed to go to Cameroon. So we are exploring both the involvement of the African Union and of the UN bodies to undertake this impartial investigation to establish exactly how far-reaching these violations are.
All right, that's where we'll leave it for tonight. We'll certainly keep an eye to see how exactly this process develops from here on. That was the Center for Human Rights Director, Professor Frans Viljoen.